Back in 2018, a Being the Elite video was suggested for me on YouTube, and I clicked on it, never hearing of the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, or Hangman, but I did know Cody Rhodes. And I remembered him as that dude that teamed with Randy Orton and Ted DiBiase that would almost always lose the DX. Immediately, within 2 minutes in, I was already hooked. This was so different, and they're actually taking me backstage with them. Getting to hear their honest and candid thoughts on any range of topics was refreshing, and seeing how alike our wrestling-filled childhoods helped me connect with them on a deeper level. I started following them through their weekly videos. This was right as they were leaving Ring of Honor and New Japan, and just after All In. The thing that was special about the All In card is that they didn't hire all the old ECW guys or bring back Hogan for a fast money grab. They would rely on indie darlings that made their name without WWE. The All-In card was amazing because the formula for years before this was to throw as many ex-WWE guys as you can into the main event slots and fill the rest with whatever indie guys might have friends in charge of the event to job to any other ex-WWE guy that didn't have an opponent. At some point during this time, I was also suggested a video from this YouTuber that I'd never heard of, Chris Van Vliet. It was an interview with Billy Gunn, and I was immediately hooked, as there really wasn't many wrestler interviews for a while, at least that I knew of, unless it was some sort of shoot interview. Chris was doing something different and amazing, as he just had regular conversations with stars past and present on an almost weekly basis, and I was able to learn new things about wrestlers that I never knew that wasn't behind a paywall. Chris was truly a pioneer of the wrestler interview. I feel like he really deserves more credit, as he really did open the door and change the way wrestling interviews were done. The best part, he was a real fan. He asked the questions that I wanted to know. Being the Elite and the Chris Van Vliet YouTube channel became destination viewing for me. Many of you will remember the clock ticking scenes from Being the Elite, where different characters' phones would be ticking down like some mysterious countdown clock. This is where the wrestling world really started picking up. Where were they going next? After all, they had promised to stick together wherever they landed. WWE seemed like a real option, as they were in indie signing mode and gobbling any talent that had buzz. Would they really all sign with WWE? It really did seem plausible. I remember being so excited for that reveal to drop, and on New Year's of 2019 finally did, and it didn't disappoint. They were starting a new wrestling league. Boom went the dynamite, pun intended. The wrestling world was set ablaze. So many questions and not that many answers, starting with how are they going to fund this new league, and who is Tony Khan? Fans flocked to Being the Elite each week to get answers, but really all that led to was more questions. Then, one of the most important wrestling interviews of our current era happened. Chris Van Vliet secured the first interview with Tony Khan. We would finally have some answers. If you've been a fan of wrestling, you've seen and heard of all these startup companies over the years with all this same hype and fanfare, but they never really achieved anything close to what WCW was as far as WWE competition. Sure, TNA made it interesting for a few years, but eventually they fell into the same trap, brought in Hogan, and started hiring as many ex-WWE stars as they could. Tony Khan on this interview assured us this was going to be different and outlined the dream plan for the internet wrestling fan. They were going to avoid all the pitfalls that led to many wrestling companies collapsing, and he was a billionaire willing to spend whatever it took to provide the best product. The best part, he was actually a wrestling fan. This isn't a Ted Turner situation. This man is a hardcore wrestling fan. Fans around the world rejoiced. This man understands wrestling, and he is funding the promotion. This is a dream. This is different. He understood our plight with the current product. Instead of punishing hardcore fans, they were going to cater to us. What a wild concept. The momentum just continued to build as the days passed, and we grew closer to their first ever pay-per-view. AEW Double or Nothing 2019 is probably my favorite pay-per-view of all time, or at least in the last 10 years. I was so excited to watch all these matches. They really delivered on their promise, topping it off with the biggest free agent acquisition with Jon Moxley for their surprise debut. This proved that they were willing to spend the money to be competitive. This show wasn't over though, as afterwards they held a media scrum and allowed wrestling writers to ask them any question and really allowed the fans a peek behind the curtain. AEW had nothing to hide and embraced the internet wrestling community in a way never seen before, which in turn made us feel even more a part of this wrestling movement. After the success of Double or Nothing 2019, the question on everyone's mind was, when does weekly television start and on what network? AEW continued to play coy, but assured us that it would be on a major network, as they continued to stir the pot on Being the Elite, the Nightmare Family's Road 2s, and maybe most importantly, Chris Van Vliet's YouTube channel. All Elite Wrestling seemed to give Chris Van granted Elite access to the entire roster and got to use his platform to create buzz and introduce their roster through long-form interviews. They didn't have weekly TV, but being able to stand on the shoulders on one of the biggest wrestling YouTubers, they were able to cultivate relationships between their wrestlers and the wrestling audience. AEW was embracing being different. For the first year, almost all of the AEW pay-per-views were free to anyone that was willing to download the BR app. Another example that AEW was putting the wrestling fans first and help build a stronger relationship with their fans. They were going to give new wrestling content to sample and with zero risk to us. Also, thanks to Being the Elite continuing on after the Young Bucks had signed contracts, we were basically given backstage passes to these pay-per-views and got to witness never-before-seen moments like Jon Moxley minutes before his debut through the crowd after the main event of Double or Nothing. The next move for Tony Khan after Double or Nothing appear on the Stone Cold podcast. It was there that he received affirmation and praise from one of the biggest names ever in the wrestling business. Stone Cold Steve Austin approves, and that was a huge W in the win column for the AEW brand. The momentum continued to build.
With one of wrestling's greatest legends as an ally, AEW now had respect, and more importantly, real buzz in an industry that was dominated for decades by WWE. WWE had pretty much been in cruise control for the last few years. Without any competition, they controlled the market and refused to let the audience determine who the stars were. WWE continued to force feed stars that we didn't connect with, but had the physical attributes that gave Vince McMahon a boner. Just ask Zack Ryder. Vince McMahon was basically saying that wrestling fans are dumb, and that the 70-something-year-old pioneer who operates under the belief that wrestling fans have no short-term memory knows better, which then led to the total desertion of long-term storytelling in favor of quick cash grab storylines. It was during this time that it felt like WWE were painting themselves in a corner, as this culminated in one of the worst main events of all time, in Seth Rollins versus The Fiend, a match that was placed in the confines of a Hell in a Cell.